Hello, I'm Dr. Joe Arminio. Welcome to my channel, America Resurgent. In this video, I'm going to make the case that President Trump is involved in a very, very high-stakes gamble vis-a-vis Iran and also Russia and Red China. How high a stakes? About as high as it can get, risking nuclear war. Also, high stakes in another sense, in that the pressure he's now applying upon Iran, whether he's actually at war or not, whether we're actually launching airstrikes or not, this pressure is so acute that we are risking a massive confrontation with our two major rivals, Russia and Communist China. And this pressure I talk about, well, we've been hearing in the legacy news that Iran is in the throes of a homespun uprising, that the regime is so corrupt and tyrannical that the people have had enough, that they're running the country into the ground. Is that the case? I think there's some hardships, but I think, in fact, we have been behind the chaos. We have been fomenting the chaos. So I know these are serious things to be saying about the administration, that it's running gambles, that it's fomenting chaos. What do I base this upon? Well, I'm going to draw upon a very important interview on the Judging Freedom podcast. Judge Andrew Napolitano had on a very knowledgeable former British diplomat by the name of Alistair Crook. And he's provided very important clues on this recent Judge Napolitano show, which is a big part of the argument or the information I'm going to present to you in this video. But before I go any further, you're probably asking, well, if there is indeed a high-stakes gamble going on, why is it happening? What are we getting from it? What is President Trump got in mind? I don't want to get into the detail too much, but I want to say, and I have in previous videos and other things I've written, I want to say this. I believe that the Trump administration is determined to perpetuate what is called the petrodollar system at all costs, if necessary, even by force, even in fact risking nuclear war. Not to mention a confrontation with our greatest rivals abroad. And what is this petrodollar system? Well, what this is, the petrodollar refers to selling oil exclusively in dollars, or nearly exclusively. OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, has been a part of this petrodollar system since 1974. That's a very important date to keep in mind because I have to take it back further. Back in 1953-54, we overthrew the secular government of Iran. Prime Minister Mossadegh was overthrown by the British and Americans. It's well established now. Why? Because he wanted to take ownership of his country's oil. Can you imagine that? He wanted to nationalize oil, and we said no, and the British said no. We replaced him with the Shah of Iran, who stayed in power until 1979. That's important. Another important date to keep in mind, 1979, because the Shah of Iran was in power and he was an ally of ours and of Israel. There was no tension between Iran and Israel back then. He was an ally of ours and Israel, and he was, in a sense, part of the petrodollar system that was established in 1974. But in 1979, he's overthrown. A religious cleric comes to power. They have been in power. The clerics have been in power in Iran ever since. They don't take kindly to Israel. They talk about it being this devilish ownership of what is Arab land and so forth, and its tension. But they've also been developing their nuclear program. Some say they've been inching closer to the bomb. But they've also, more importantly, been moving further and further away from the petrodollar system. Now, in the year 2000, when the euro became a currency for the first time, this is the European Union's currency, the euro, Saddam Hussein said, I'm going to stop selling my oil in dollars. At that time, Iraq was part of the petrodollar system. I'm going to sell oil in euros. Well, within short order, what happened to him? We overthrew him. Oh, they say he had weapons of mass destruction. He was working with Al-Qaeda. No, it's because he left the petrodollar system. I would argue that's why. Well, around the same time, Iran was grumbling, and they're talking about leaving the petrodollar system. They want to sell oil in euros, but they don't do it. They watch what Iraq does, let Iraq go first, and they see what happened to Iraq. They held back. Well, it turns out that in February of 2016, Iran, under the clerical control now, this is a long time removed from the government of the Shah of Iran, switches selling oil from dollars into euros. In the next month, March 2016, the then presidential candidate Donald Trump talks about Iran is a terrible threat to peace, that they're going to be developing or are developing a nuclear bomb, and that presidential candidate Trump believes that the peace arrangement that the Europeans, the Obama administration, and Iran had entered into in the prior year, 2015, was a very bad deal. And I suggest perhaps why he was really upset was not because Iran was deviating from the so-called joint comprehensive plan of action, that is dealing with the nuclear reactor in Iran, but because they were unloading, moving away from the petrodollar system, specifically selling their oil in dollars, now selling it in euros. In any case, Trump would eventually break with that agreement that Obama had entered into, this nuclear reactor program, and he would break in the year 2018 and apply tremendous economic sanctions against Iran in his first administration. And yet at the height of his first administration, in January of 2019, this is after he's broken the nuclear treaty with the nuclear reactor treaty with Iran. This is after he's been applying sanctions. His own director of national intelligence says, we conclude that Iran's not developing a bomb. We conclude that they are complying with the Obama arrangement of 2015. And then in May of 2019, same year, the International Atomic Energy Agency also concludes Iran's not developing a bomb. Well, that's the background. Now we come up to the present time. Iran and Israel are not getting along, not since the fall of Shah of Iran in 1979. Tremendous tension. Well, in October 7, 2023, we know what happened. Hamas wreaks havoc, kills over 1,000 Israelis, terrible war crimes committed. Iran comes to the aid of Hamas in Gaza. They activate their so-called axis of resistance against Israel. Not a good thing. This goes on. It's been very intense for 2 years as Netanyahu wages his war in Gaza. So now we are at the present time, and the Trump administration is wanting to undertake a regime change of one kind or another. I should also say, though, we have to take you back. Remember how Iran's moving away from the petrodollar system. We saw what they did in 2016. Well, in 2024, in January 1 of 2024, Iran leaves the petrodollar system completely and joins something called BRICS. That is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance, then of now up to 10 countries, major countries in the global south, Russia and Red China especially part of it. And they want to move toward a new currency, a BRICS currency. It's not out there yet. They're using local currencies to settle sale of oil. We're upset about that. Same thing that Venezuela wants to do. Venezuela wants to leave the petrodollar system. They sell oil in dollars. They want to move to the BRICS system. We don't like that. That's why I would argue we've overthrown, ultimately the reason why we overthrew Maduro, or kidnapped him, abducted him. There's a connection here between Venezuela and Iran. So what we see is that the Trump administration is upholding the petrodollar system, I would argue, by force of arms, both in Venezuela and in Iran. That's the background. That's the motive. That's what I'm arguing is the ultimate motive here. Yes, I know there's tension between Israel and Iran, and Iran does very nasty things vis-a-vis Israel, things it shouldn't be doing. I understand all that, but underlining all this is something I think deeper, the petrodollar system. All right, that's the background. Now, I mentioned before that we have these important clues into the thinking of the Trump administration, clues that address the high-stakes gamble that the President of the United States is undertaking. What might those clues be? So what I'm going to do now is share with you a clip from the Judging Freedom, Judge Napolitano, recent show where he is interviewing the former British diplomat Alistair Crooke. What Crooke has to say about, of all things, U.S. bombing raids on Russia.
I want to ask you one question about President Putin and Russia. Trump said last week that he spoke to President Putin, who told him that one of his country homes had been attacked by Ukrainian drones.
The point is not whether President Putin was there or not there, or whether it was directly targeted on that house. But beneath that compound, or in that compound, are deeply buried bunkers. Are command bunkers by which a Russian president would take care of a nuclear war from that bunker. That is the command center. And whether that was the target or the house, it's all on a compound, an exclusive presidential compound, the bunker as well as the house. Now put this together with, first of all, the attack that was, I think it was in May or June, on the strategic bomber fleet of Russia. the attack by drones that were so much in the model that we later saw on the 12th of June by Israel in the surprise attack on Iran. The attack on its strategic bombers, which were out in the open as per the SALT treaty. And then we had, during further negotiations, 4 long-range ATACMS missiles, American long-range ATACMS missiles, were fired during a previous set of negotiations, and they were fired at Vorozhny. And Vorozhny is where Russia has its early warning over the horizon radars. They are nothing, neither the strategic bomber fleet, nor the early warning radars, nor the bunker, the command bunker in the compound at Valdai, have anything to do with what's happening in Ukraine. These are all to do about a nuclear war. And what is the message, therefore, that CIA is sending? We don't quite know what the message is, and I don't think in Moscow they are sure, 100% sure, but it seems to be saying, you know, if you're going to push back against us, Moscow, if you're going to push back about Iran, about Venezuela, or anything else, look, we can take you out. We can hit your strategic bombers, we can hit your radars, and we can hit your command center. We've just given you a little sample to see that you understand us.
So we've just heard from the British diplomat, Mr. Alistair Crook. He's talked about bombing strikes that we conducted deep inside Russia. We being the United States, ostensibly Ukraine, but he believes, and I think he's right, it was really the United States. So let's look at each of these strikes in turn. So the first strike occurs in August of 2024. It's aimed down here in southern Russia at Voronezh. This is one of Russia's radar boxes. It's an over-the-horizon radar. It's eyes and ears of the Russian strategic nuclear forces. This particular radar box could detect missiles launched out of the Mediterranean, perhaps a U.S. nuclear submarine firing a nuclear-tipped offensive missile against European Russia. It could also detect strikes coming out of the Persian Gulf or elsewhere. If we can hit this radar box, and the attack, by the way, was conducted out of Ukraine using 4 U.S.-made attack missiles, we could certainly do it elsewhere. That's the message we're sending. We could hit your radar boxes elsewhere, and their boxes are scattered across the Russian perimeter. My hand, the symbol of my hand is showing you where those boxes might be located. The next attack or sets of attacks occurred in June 1 of 2025. This is where we hit five Russian strategic bomber bases across the Russian Federation. Now, before we point out the specific locations, let's orient ourselves in a bigger way. So you see this is a North Pole projection. Here's the North Pole. Here's Greenland. Here's Alaska. So Russian bombers would be traveling over the North Pole headed toward the United States if it were aimed toward American targets. In any case, what are the 5 air bases that supposedly the Ukrainians hit with what? With drone missiles. Well, they hit a field here in Murmansk. They hit 2 outside Moscow, approximately here and here. 1 in Irkutsk, central Siberia, and a 5th one in Amur, which is far eastern Siberia. How in God's earth could the Ukrainians possibly have gotten their drones all the way out to Siberia? They must have had help. In fact, the operation, no doubt, was conducted by CIA. It's more credible that the Ukrainians could have hit the targets in European Russia, but again, I think more likely, as Mr. Crook does, that the CIA is behind it. Now, what about the final attack? Well, this final attack occurred in the last couple of days of 2025, just a few weeks ago. And this attack occurred approximately here at Valdai, where my hand is pointing on the symbol for my hand. Valdai sits between St. Petersburg here and Moscow. This is one of Putin's homes, but more importantly, this is a presidential compound. Underneath that home is one of the Russian command centers, and that attack was also conducted by drones. So we seem definitely to be sending a message to the Soviets, albeit a message spaced over almost 18 months, in which we're saying we can blind you, we can knock out your radar boxes, we can hit your offensive weaponry, your bombers, and we can also hit your command and control centers, as in the case of Valdai. And why are we doing all that? We're doing that because we are preparing to hit Iran Interesting that this assault on Valdez occurs just hours before we begin to see unrest fermented in Iran. So that even if Russia wants to get involved in helping Iran out, and it would actually think about escalating to nuclear war, we can hit the Russians first. That's the message we're sending them, that we can hit your strategic nuclear forces before you can hit us. And why does this not seem far-fetched? Well, it turns out that in the summer of 2024, just to give you an example, there's a very learned article came out of a London-based School of Oriental and African Studies by Professor Dan Flesch, and Flesch made the case that now with drones, artificial intelligence, and other weaponry, it is possible, it seems to be possible, that you could launch a so-called first strike, that you could incapacitate the other fellow's nuclear arsenal before he could hit you, that you could incapacitate it without using nuclear weapons. And so we're sending that message in the most vivid way possible by actually hitting Russian targets of all things. Let's now go on to the next clip. This is another clip featuring diplomat Cook, in which he'll be talking about signs that we, the United States and Israel, are behind the unrest in Iran.
What is Netanyahu's latest lure to get Donald Trump to agree to attack Iran?
Well, I mean, I won't go too far into that because it's happened and he's been lured. And the Israeli press are very clear and full of it. Trump gave a green light for an attack on Iran. But we see all the precursors for a war in Iran happening. I mean, you know, suddenly after or just in parallel with Mar-a-Lago, demonstrations break out in Iran, and the word goes out, you see, Iran is on the point of collapse, there are demonstrations everywhere. It's just nonsense. It's the Mujahideen al-Kaq in one place, it's the Baluchis on another border, but they're armed. They're coming out armed into this. This isn't ordinary demonstrators, because look at the videos, they're armed. And the videos are being doctored to suggest they want the return of the Pahlavis, the king. I mean, it's just fake. Of course, there's some real economic hardship in Iran. There's no doubt about that. And where's that come from? The second obvious beginning to a regime change exercise, currency attack. So the rial is being attacked. Obviously, that's being organized out of Doha, where there are money exchanges, gold exchanges, and in any case, Iran doesn't have any reserves that it can fight that sort of economic war. And then we have also the press, the articles in the European press saying, oh, you know, Iran has been working with Al-Qaeda. A non sequitur, because Al-Qaeda and Iran are bitter, hated enemies of each other, and that they're planning a new terrorist 11th of September type of attack in Europe and America. They have sleeper cells everywhere ready to go. So all of those things are ready. And the last piece of it, because before an attack, what else will you see? You will see this. In the press today, in the Hebrew press today, they say, it's too late. It's too late. We've given a deadline for the complete disarmament of Hezbollah. Now we are going to attack it. And we have the permission of the Americans for that. And of course, it's always been, I know from a decade ago, you know, one of the key components of an attack in Iran is that they will simultaneously attack in Lebanon and within the Palestinian territories, so that, if you like, that the attack on Iran cannot be destabilized by military actions of other sorts taking place, so that Iran can concentrate on Iran. And there's been a huge movement of transports going to Europe, first of all, from the United States and from into Britain and into the military base of Germany, and then onwards to Israel. So clearly things are getting ready for that. And I think Haig said that, oh, well, what happened to the Venezuelans? They were effing around. They weren't doing what we told them. Either you do that, and Iran is effing around too. And you know what happens when you do that with this president? This president won't tolerate this, and it will be action.
We just heard a second time from Mr. Alistair Crook. He's making the case that the United States and our ally Israel are behind the chaos now spreading in Iran. I want to draw your attention to one particular indicator that illustrate one indicator that Mr. Crook, has pointed toward, and that is our arming of insurgents inside Iran. And so, by the way, here is Iran. I'm pointing toward it. Here's our ally Saudi Arabia. There's Iraq, Persian Gulf. Here's Russia again. Here's Red China. So we're arming the Kurds on the western side and the Baluchi on the eastern side of Iran. Very rugged terrain, the Zagros Mountains on the west and Himalayas on the eastern side. So it's easy to smuggle in weaponry, to get advisors in there, to train these militia, and then when you think they're ready to unleash them, which is what we've been doing. But there are also apparently CIA and Mossad sleeper cells, and in fact the Israeli press has been very open about their activity inside Iran. Their special forces and their Mossad operations inside Iran. So this, by the way, is something we did back in 1954 when we overthrew Mossadegh. We also armed the Kurds and the Baluchis, and they helped us in those cases. What could Russia do and Red China do in the face of our attempted overthrow regime change in Iran? Well, quite a few things. In the case of the Russians, they're likely to provide the heavy muscle, if you will, the weaponry, ballistic missiles. They could augment the ballistic missile force that Iran has. These missiles then could be fired at targets in Israel, or they could be fired at quite a few American targets. American military bases are here in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran, United Arab Emirates. They might even try to hit U.S. forces at sea. As in terms of the Red Chinese, well, first, Red China is drawing 90% or purchasing 90% of Iran's oil. Red China, since the mid-90s, has a tremendous thirst, an increasing thirst for oil, and they pull in oil from not only Iran, but throughout the Middle East and Venezuela, Africa, other locations. But they definitely want to keep pulling in Iranian oil, and they'd be very concerned if the Iranian government fell, what that might do to their access to oil. How might the Red Chinese intervene here? Well, they might intervene on the ground, on foot. They might put down the insurgents here in the eastern and western sides. They might provide counterinsurgency. We know that the Chinese have helped the Iranian nuclear program. Some say they've helped them develop the nuclear bomb. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Another way that Red China can bring its unhappiness to our attention, to America's attention, is to apply pressure elsewhere, for instance, against Taiwan. And even just recently, a few weeks ago, we know that they launched a rather intense military air and naval maneuvers around Taiwan to telegraph their displeasure toward things we had been doing. So these are the variety of ways that we have been creating trouble in Iran, and the ways that Russia and Red China could push back. Of course, I'm talking about Russia and Red China pushing back in a military sense. They've been pushing back in a much more profound way, economically and financially speaking. They've been setting up a rival payment system to the petrodollar system. They've been setting up the BRICS payment system. They want to reduce the use of the dollar in international commerce, maybe even one day replace it altogether. The question arises, can we maintain the petrodollar system? More to the point, can we maintain it without resort to force? Ultimately, can we maintain it without taking these enormous gambles, this terrible, terrible risk that Mr. Trump is undertaking right now to maintain it? Can we do it another way? But more important even than those questions, is there a better system out there? Better than what BRICS is proposing, better than what we have now. And I suggest there is a better system. It would not require these kinds of huge gambles that the administration is incurring. Wouldn't, I don't think, require us waging war left and right. We could rely mostly or even exclusively upon commerce to maintain the system. I leave a discussion of that system for another time.
Well, this concludes what I have to say. Please comment. Please like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We are doing everything we can to advance the American cause.